Hey, it's Austin James. If you're like me, trying to live your best life while living with diabetes, you can relate to worrying if you're doing a good job managing your diabetes. I use the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor to get real-time glucose readings and see the impact of every meal and activity to make better decisions. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor can help me live life with diabetes on my own terms, and it gives me more time for the things I love, like being a dad and a musician. Now this is progress. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Ampire. Hey babies, 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 hey babies. Hi everyone, hi everyone, hi everyone. Hi everybody, been a while. Hope you guys enjoyed your bye week as much as I enjoyed my bye week. It was a nice break, needed it. For the stretch run here with the Commanders, can't wait. A couple other things I just want to tell you about. No Callow today. He's off taking his little bye week break because the Capitals have an extended few days off, so he's going to take a few days for himself too. So we'll be back together on Thursday. So just me and you and whoever I wrangle in to join the show over the next couple of days. You'll hear from London Fletcher tomorrow. I think Scott Jackson's going to join me later this week, but we'll figure all that out and have a little fun this week together. All right. One other thing I want to tell you about that I'm very honored to be doing tomorrow. As you may know, the Army-Navy game is here this weekend. I would go, but we're going to be down in New Orleans with the Commanders and the Saints, so I'm not going to be able to go to the game at Northwest Stadium. Wish I could. It's a bucket list thing for all sports fans. If you've never been to the Army-Navy game, it's an amazing spectacle. Whether you're a fan of either side, it really doesn't matter. It's like one of the true sporting events where you can go and just enjoy the spectacle and nature of the rivalry and the event. And the outcome doesn't really matter. Obviously, if you're an Army family or a Navy family, it might feel a little different to you, but it truly is one of the greatest sporting events of the calendar year. And because it's here, I wish I was able to go, but I can't. But I am doing an event tomorrow, the media day, out at the stadium with both coaches and some dignitaries from the DC government and the Maryland government. And I'm really excited to be part of that. So I just want to thank them publicly for asking me to be part of the Media Day festivities tomorrow. My father fought in World War II as a member of the United States Army, was a Bronze Star recipient. He never really talked a lot about his active duty in the European theater of World War II. There are apparently a lot of memories that he didn't like to dredge up or talk about that he was part of, but it is part of our family's legacy. And so for the first time being asked to do something officially with the Army-Navy game is a real honor. So I just want to say thank you to the Commanders and to Events DC and to the organizers of the Army-Navy Media Day. And I'll just reiterate, I wish I could go to the game. I would have loved to have attended the game this weekend, but we got other business to take care of with the other team in town, the Commanders, as we head down to New Orleans this weekend for the first of the Final Four. I think the most important thing to think about here, at least, I think the theme for this week is, and I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about everyone else, but like the theme for this week really is going to be don't scoreboard watch. Don't worry about everybody else. There are a million different outcomes that could occur. Obviously, the path to the division basically ended yesterday because Philadelphia got by and beat Carolina. That was one of the close games of the early afternoon. I got to hand it to Carolina. They've been very, very competitive the last 3 weeks. They could have beaten any one of three, two definitive playoff teams and one likely playoff team, Tampa, over the last 3 weeks. They gave up a late field goal. They got to overtime against Tampa after they had scored with 30 seconds left. Last week, they had yesterday, they had two opportunities to beat the Eagles and did not. And then, of course, a couple weeks ago, they nearly beat the Chiefs. So to Dave Canales and Bryce Young, and I actually, watched a lot of Carolina yesterday. Credit where credit is due. They're playing hard. They're getting better. They're extremely competitive. And they've lost to three playoff teams. You could argue two of which have been the best teams in their respective conferences over the last couple of months. Kansas City has lost one game all year, and Philadelphia hasn't lost since week 4. So, we're talking about potentially a Super Bowl matchup, and they fell to both of them by a combined 9 points, could have beat either one of them right at the buzzer, had the ball in Philadelphia yesterday in Eagles territory, converted one crazy fourth down and could have had another one. And had they converted the second one, would have had a shot to win at the end and beaten Philadelphia, would have been the upset of the day. But it didn't happen. But because of that, not that I felt really like that there was much of the door being cracked open by the Eagles because they just won't lose, but that seemed to shut it down. 3 games up, 4 games to go. Philadelphia's schedule is this at 11-2, home versus Pittsburgh. So, you know, like that's a possibility. Then they'll play Washington. So obviously that's a possibility. But the last 2 games are both home games, so they would need them to go off the rails the way that they did a year ago, and maybe losing streak would do that, possibly. But their last 2 home games are the Cowboys and the Giants, both of them at home. And obviously, like, if you just kind of assume that Giants game, if they need to win it, would win it, that's 12, which means Washington would have to win out to tie Philadelphia if they were to lose the other 3 games. So the road to the division is all but sealed yesterday after that win over Carolina. And so, you know, I'll go back to what I'm talking about. Like, we can't scoreboard watch because the division is pretty much out of reach and is unlikely to occur. And it would take us winning out just to even have a real shot at it. So, because they already have 11 wins. So, like, let's just get that out of our minds and start thinking about what needs to happen for the wild card. And I'll go back to it. I think Dan Quinn will take this position when we talk to him, you know, starting later today. He'll hold his first Zoom call with reporters since the bye week ended. And I'm sure people will ask him about the Final Four and the stretch run, and you're still in position to make the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they have consistently been head down, focus on what you can control. We're playing the Saints this week. That's all that really matters. Maybe we'll talk about Marshawn Lattimore if there's something to update you on. Outside of that, our head has been down the whole time. We've been locked in each and every week. The guys went away this weekend. We gave them the requisite time off. It was needed for everybody, myself included, honestly. We've needed this for like 3-4 weeks. Those of us who've been in it. The bye week, it like could have come a month ago. We totally needed it. And maybe we'd be talking about the division had it happened. But I believe that they're going to take this position of head down. This is who we're playing this week. Control what you can control. If we win our games, everything will work out in the end. And then we'll talk to you in January about who our opponent is. And don't really worry about it, because if we sit there and we look up and we start to go through what I'm about to go through, you're going to make yourself nuts trying to figure out like all the different ways by which we're rooting for what each and every single week. But that's the reality. 4 games to go. 2-2 probably makes the playoffs, but I don't think it's a certainty, mainly because of what the Rams did yesterday. 3-1 is a almost lock. I mean, 11 would typically be a lock. And it feels like, because the NFC West teams have to play each other, that none of them, but certainly not 2 of them, will get to 11 by the end of all of it. So 11 is a near utter lock to make the playoffs this year. And if they get to 11, the hope would be, and again, the hope would be that it wouldn't be as the 7 seed, because while I'm going to buy into this whole don't get too far ahead of yourself, don't make this out to be bigger than what it is, like just play your games, win your games, see how it all shakes out. 11 still could be the 7 seed dependent on what happens with Green Bay. So let's go through it. Like, there are some lost causes here, Minnesota being the biggest one of all of them. Green Bay, potentially, I want to go through them, which means the path is very narrow here. Like, 11 feels almost like a necessity to be certain to get in. 10 would probably do it. 2-2, but 3-1 certainly does it. 4-0, and then we're talking about probably a higher seed than maybe we would have expected from the get-go. But this goes back to Thursday, and I was off Friday, so I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but maybe the best game of the weekend, not a surprise, was the meeting between Detroit and Green Bay. The Lions won 34-31. They did some Dan Campbell overly, extremely aggressive things. I have this like funny feeling, and I bet all of the Detroit fans pit of their stomach go, your instincts are so great in just about everything, but it's this one blind spot that you have that you feel like you have to prove your confidence over and over and over. And if it happens at the wrong moment in the wrong game against the wrong team, like it did in the playoffs last year, like it did late in the season against Dallas, which didn't matter because it was regular, like it did in the playoffs when they went for things they shouldn't have gone for, it backfires on them. And then all of a sudden you're playing just like a Super Bowl caliber team who takes advantages of mistakes like that. Pit of their stomach, the Detroit fans have to feel like this is our year and we've got everything going for us. And I've got no real complaint about Dan Campbell and the team that they have because it's the best team we've ever had in the history of our franchise. We've never had a run like this over the last few years in our franchise. Hard for any of us, hard to complain about what they're doing here. But if there is one major blind spot, it's that they go for these things. And it worked against Green Bay, and they won 34-31, which for our purposes is a really good outcome because the NFC North teams have been racing ahead of everybody. It's left the path to the playoffs to be very narrow for literally everybody else if you're not going to win your division. And we are the unfortunate ones that aren't in a division that is muddled like the NFC South or the NFC West. Because the Eagles have done what they've done over the last couple of months, our path to the playoffs is almost certainly the wild card, and it leaves us no margin for error, unlike those other two divisions, the NFC South and the NFC West, where there's a ton of margin for error. You could make an argument for either Atlanta or Tampa Bay in the South at this point. And in the West, you could make an argument for all four of them to some degree. Less likely for San Francisco, but any of them could end up winning. That's not where Washington is. It's not a get hot now and you get in situation. It's a, we better win 10, maybe 11 games and we'll just get in and probably is the lowest wild card, which is why Green Bay is the big deal here and why the result on Thursday was a big deal for us. We kind of needed Detroit to win that. What we don't want are 3 12-win teams in the NFC North, which is where that was heading, which meant somebody would win the division and you definitively can only get to the 7 seed. We need one of them to have a rough go at the end of the season. And the only one that is even hinting that it's going to be them is the Green Bay Packers at this point. So they got 4 losses now. And I got to credit them because their 4 losses are 2 of them to Detroit, 1 to Minnesota, 1 to Philadelphia. 5 total losses between the teams that they've lost to. So if they were doing college football playoff, 9-4 would get in. Basically, here's what they have left. At Seattle, that game's enormous. Absolutely, positively enormous. 1 for Seattle to potentially win the NFC West. 2 for Green Bay to now, well, they're not going to win their division. Just like we're saying we're not going to win our division. Detroit has 1 loss. They are 12-1. Green Bay is now 9-4. They've already lost to Detroit twice. Detroit wins 1 more game. Green Bay can't win their division, so they're only playing for the wild card. That's it. They're only playing for the wild card. This Seattle game is immense for them. Then they're going to get New Orleans, who we're going to see this weekend, and I don't know if Derek Carr's playing. We'll have to see. Then they play Minnesota, which is an absolutely gigantic game. Then they'll get Chicago at home end of the year. Okay, I hate projecting out any games that like this one's going to be easier, that one's going to be easy, but New Orleans at home December in the state that they're in. Chicago at home week 18, and go look at what they looked like against a good team. That feels like 11 already for like Green Bay, at minimum 11. If they were to win either of the at games, Seattle or Minnesota, we're talking about 12, which again relegates Washington to, without a win out scenario, that they can't really get to the spot that would be anything above the 7 seed. And not that I'm complaining about any playoff positioning about where Washington would be, but if you're trying to avoid what looks to be the behemoths, Philadelphia or Detroit, the most likely teams to have the one or to have the 2 seed, right? Because one will be the 1 seed, it's only one bye. The other will be the 2 seed. As the 7, that's who you'd play. You kind of want to get to 11 to try to get to the 6. And here, head's going to matter. Or not just head-to-head, but the tiebreakers are going to matter. So Washington has a better conference record than Green Bay, whose 4 losses are all to the to NFC teams, 2 to Detroit, 1 to Minnesota, 1 to Philadelphia. The tiebreak in the wild card, if it just came down to 2 teams, if it came down to 3, you'd have to do common opponents and all that. But if it just came down to 2, 1 is head-to-head. Well, we didn't play the Packers this year. 2 is conference record, which currently Green Bay's is 4-4 and Washington's is 5-3. Both of them obviously are playing only NFC opponents the rest of the way. So the record will matter where, we end up. Obviously, if Washington were to win out, they would have a better record than Green Bay in the conference. And so if Green Bay ended up losing one of these games and Washington won out, which is a lot to ask, the tiebreak would go to Washington at 12 wins, and they would actually get the 6 seed over Green Bay's 7, which I think at this juncture feels like a better situation than what we're walking into if Green Bay were to have a better record. Still, like I said, like with New Orleans and Chicago at home on their schedule, if they were to win in Seattle, them getting to a bare minimum 12 wins feels likely, which means Washington wouldn't be able to lose one game along the way here. And they've got Philadelphia at home as the most formidable opponent that is here. As a reminder, New Orleans at this week, Philadelphia home, Atlanta home, and then they end in Dallas. I'll get to them in a little bit because Dallas is not out of it. And obviously whatever happens tonight is going to be a really big deal for them. If Cincinnati knocks them off, that should knock them back in a spot where they don't really have a likely scenario. Dallas's only real hope is that they stay in striking distance of us so that week 18 matters. So again, this will go back to Washington just needs to control what they can control, which is just win the matchups that are in front of them. If we keep winning, Dallas can't catch us. Week 18 won't matter. Let's see how it plays out there. And honestly, for the purpose of this conversation, if Green Bay keeps winning, if they go to Seattle and win, if they beat New Orleans, then they have this game with Minnesota that will probably, if Minnesota's the one that still has a shot at the division. So this may matter for them for the division, depending on what Detroit does and what Minnesota does from here. And I'll get to them in a minute. But essentially we need Green Bay to fall off and then for Washington to just hang in there and keep winning. Week 18 may not matter. I think for Dallas, it won't. I think they're too far behind the 8 ball. Their only realistic shot is probably to catch us. So they're rooting hard for New Orleans and Atlanta over the next couple of weeks and probably banking on Philadelphia knocking us off in a couple of weeks. Although, that's one where if you watched Philadelphia yesterday and you watched the first game that Washington had with the Eagles, you know that it could be a very different outcome this time around. So we'll have to see. But that's where it is. The tie breaks themselves are this. Head-to-head won't matter if it's Green Bay or Minnesota. Conference record will matter if it is Minnesota and not Green Bay currently as it stands. But with Minnesota with only 2 losses, they'd have to take a few losses here along the way just to get Washington into that conversation. And again, not unlike Green Bay, don't seem to be heading in that direction. All 3 of these NFC North teams appear to be stable and strong. Will Green Bay fall off now that they know that they can't win their division? I don't know, obviously, the answer to that, but I have a hard time buying that they are. I actually feel like they have staying power. I believe back in the summer that they were a likely Super Bowl competitor, and maybe they still are if they can avoid Detroit, or who knows, beating a team 3 times is really hard to do. Anyway, third tie break is the win-loss percentage in common games with a minimum of 4. You'll be able to basically find out. And then 4 would be strength of victory, which actually, if it got to that, okay, so with Green Bay, there is no head-to-head. The conference records could end up being about the same, right? It's possible. That's a possibility that could happen. Win-loss percentage in common games, I'd have to actually then go, where are they on that stuff? Because Washington didn't play Minnesota, but they did play Philadelphia. They both lost to Philadelphia. So I'd have to go through and see where the common games are. But if it did get to strength of victory, this is where the blowout over Tennessee, the blowout over Cleveland, the blowout over Carolina, the blowout over Arizona could actually come into play if it got that far that they ended up with the same conference record. So there's a lot here that I'm watching with Green Bay. The division is out of their hands now. They lost twice to Detroit. They'd have to win out, and Detroit would have to lose out. And that probably wouldn't be enough because they already swept them. So that's not true. If they won out and Detroit lost out, they could still win the division. But who believes that's happening at this point? Like, that doesn't even look like a serious likelihood at this point that would even possibly happen now. So Green Bay knows the division, not unlike with us with Philadelphia. We know the division's kind of out of our hands at this point. 3 games back, 4 to go. They lost twice to them. That's out of their hands. They're only playing for the wild card. Mentally, do they lose to Seattle this week because Seattle needs this to stay ahead in the NFC West, and it's a tough place to play? Do they bounce back and win that game and show that they are definitively not going to put their spot in any kind of real jeopardy? We'll have to see. I think we're major Seattle fans this weekend because I think we need Seattle to go out there and win, go at home and beat Green Bay to put all of these things kind of in motion. We won't have head-to-head. We could have the same conference record. It would then get to win-loss in common games and potentially strength of victory. And that's where a difference could be if Washington were to go 3-1 and if Green Bay would lose at least 1 game and potentially 2 here down the road. All right, let me take a quick break. We'll start going through the rest of the other results yesterday next. Bram, watch the show, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write 1 million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Blinds.com Cyber Monday Last Chance is happening now. Don't miss out on up to 45% off site-wide. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 45% site-wide, plus a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
All right, welcome back. So the big one, Green Bay losing the other day opened up what feels like a narrower path to potentially the 6th seed for Washington if the Commanders can go what appears to be well, if they go 4-0, they'll get that. But like 3-1 down the stretch, 3-1 to get to 12 wins or 11 wins would give them this path to potentially the 6th seed if Green Bay were to lose 2 more times, which would be Seattle and Minnesota, most likely. That would give them the path to the 6th seed. Otherwise, it's just the 7, and 10 may be enough, or maybe not. So let's go through the other results yesterday. This is what's keeping me up at night with this. Like, Washington's having this phenomenal season. It looks like they're going to get to double-digit wins. In any other year, getting to 10 is almost a de facto you're in. But because of the way that the NFC North teams are playing and the level that they're playing at, 3 of them, Green Bay, Minnesota, and Detroit, it's left this extremely, extremely narrow path to the playoffs for Washington. And the scary part is now the NFC West and probably the worst result of the day, which was the Rams yesterday. But let's go through and finish up with the North here first. Minnesota beats Atlanta. badly, 42-17. Atlanta is floundering pretty quickly here. Minnesota is still alive to be the 1 seed or the NFC North winner at worst. Second best record in the conference. They still get to play Detroit one more time. They, for all intents and purposes, I've described them the last couple of weeks as the lost cause. And because they are at 11-2, Washington's not going to catch them. Short of some kind of free fall, which I can't imagine would occur. Atlanta is the one that, I'm glad we're seeing what we're seeing, because now at 6-7, what I think we want to happen is them to falter at least one more time. If they can get to 8 losses, that basically means Washington has no excuse but to surpass them for a playoff berth, and that the NFC South is going to be a one-bid division. And in all likelihood would be Tampa Bay, even though Atlanta beat them twice. The problem with this theory is this, and I talked about this last week, and this is the scenarios by which that you don't love. Atlanta's schedule is this: at the Raiders, Giants at home, at Washington, Carolina at home. Washington winning 2, including beating Atlanta, all but eliminates them from getting into the playoffs. So there's a very simple solution. But the issue really is, look at the rest of the schedule. If Washington were to look, here's Atlanta, who's totally faltering, falling off the map. And it's hard to envision them going on some kind of run. But look who they're playing at the end of the year. At Raiders, Giants, before the Washington game, Carolina. It takes them one, I don't even know if I'd call it an upset, but one upset over Washington. And if they pull that off, then all of a sudden, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the Falcons stealing a playoff spot. So, look, the hope is the Raiders, for some reason, knock them off, or the Giants somehow knock them off. But in the extreme likelihood that neither one of those things actually happens, the Commanders game against Atlanta is going to be a de facto playoff game, at least for the Falcons. They're going to have to win to stay alive, in all likelihood, unless Tampa falls off and the division comes back in play, which is a scenario. Or Washington, because the Commanders losing to the Eagles the week before is not that far-fetched to believe. So this is why we don't like what Atlanta has on their schedule the rest of the way. We're big Raiders fans this weekend. And if nothing else, again, this will always go back to just control what you can control. And that is you win your games and it won't matter. At 6-7, they're 2 games back. They do have a shot to beat you and erase one of those margins, but they don't in any other way if you don't allow it to happen. So that's the Atlanta situation. Vikings are a lost cause. Vikings are potentially, because they're going to play Detroit, they're going to have a shot to win that division. They just need the Eagles. They're going to be huge fans of us when we play the Eagles in a couple of weeks to give them a shot to actually win the conference. And I didn't buy them, obviously, at the beginning of the year. They're the biggest surprise in the NFL. To me, it might be one of them, but they are singularly the biggest surprise in the NFL to me this year, to have the record that they have, because it's no fluke. Like when we were getting ready for the Tennessee game, they had recently played the Vikings, and I watched them defensively, and I watched how Darnold played. And so I've subsequently seen more of them, and I totally buy them. I think both sides of the ball, I buy this system. I buy Darnold in it. I'm going to play this thing either later today or tomorrow, where there was a debate on the ESPN Sunday NFL Countdown show about whether Sam Darnold should get paid or they should let him walk because they drafted J.J. McCarthy. And I think it's an interesting, worthwhile, what do you do here? And if it were me, I would re-sign Darnold because of the level by which he's playing there. And I think it would largely depend on what his cost is on the open market. Is this going to be like Baker Mayfield, where Baker's getting like $30 to $40 million a year, which is way under what the top 5 to 10 quarterbacks get? You're going to have to pay somebody to do this. He fits so well. If he's not going to get anything more than that, or he's not going to get the Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow deal, whatever, from another team, which I would find to be very unlikely would be the case, then they could fall into the Tampa Bay category of, hey, he's really good here. We win with this guy. You got to pay a quarterback at some point. You're taking a chance if you take McCarthy. I know we drafted him high and we liked him and all coming off the injury, but off of the season we had, why wouldn't we just give the money to this guy, kick the McCarthy can down the road, let him get healthy in 2-3 years when his contract's up? Who knows? An injury could have happened. He may be playing anyway. I think you have to really seriously think about it. And I like the way that they're going, and the more that I've seen, it's hard not to buy that they should re-sign him. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off track. Anyway, that's at Minnesota, lost cause. They could be the 1 seed by the end of all this. Atlanta, we can eliminate them, so like they're in front of us, but I hate their schedule because I think they can stay alive because of their schedule. They lose to the Raiders, they're done. They lose to the Giants, they're done. They win both of those games, and I would expect them to, even with how poorly they're playing. All of a sudden, that Commanders game's a very big deal game in Week 17. All right, as for New Orleans, they're now 5-8, so they're barely alive, but alive. We can essentially eliminate them this weekend by beating them, because if tiebreak goes to head, 5-9 won't cut it for them. They'll be done. It doesn't take much to knock them out either way. This would be a devastating loss for all the other reasons we were talking about earlier, with the path to Green Bay, with Atlanta's door open, Tampa Bay's door opened. This would also keep New Orleans' door open. They barely beat the Giants 14-11. Washington, I know Vegas has moved us up as a pretty, hefty favorite on the road, is almost a touchdown favorite, something like that. If you want to know, New Orleans, since firing their coach, has won 3 of 4. Derek Carr did get hurt, so we'll have to see what that is. They get the Commanders, then they go to Green Bay, very tough game. Raiders at home, then they're at Tampa. So there's a sliver of hope for them, but it doesn't feel very likely, and Washington can really just shut the door on them this weekend. So the answer to them is win in New Orleans this weekend. If we were to lose, this is where I think this has fallen into the category of the Tennessee game. It's a must. They can eliminate the Saints. They can make it extraordinarily hard for Atlanta, outside of making a run to win their division, to make the playoffs, win or lose against them in Week 17. And it keeps these NFC West teams kind of at bay. So this one feels a lot like a must for Washington this weekend. New Orleans does have a glimmer of hope. It's not like they're playing particularly well, but they are winning. They are 5-8. The season's not over. They are at home this weekend. And if they can get through this, they'll have a season-defining type game up in Green Bay too, which I wouldn't like their chances there, but I kind of want them knocked out. The same thing I'll say about Dallas at the end of the year when Washington plays them. I want them knocked out. I don't need them having any kind of hope or being alive where it turns into a playoff game. We want that to mean nothing to them. Otherwise, this gets too hard down the stretch for Washington, and then they get forced into the you better have won 3 of those 4 just to get there. So that's the New Orleans story. Talked about Philadelphia earlier. Here's their schedule, by the way. Pittsburgh this weekend at home. Then they come to Washington. Dallas and the Giants is how they close out. They're at 11-2. We need a free fall from them. Listen, losing to Pittsburgh at home is not far-fetched, especially the way they played against Carolina. Then we get our rematch with them. So Washington, let's just, for argument's sake, beats them. Washington wins in New Orleans. All of a sudden, they're just 1 game back. They would need help from Dallas or the Giants. Both of those games are in Philadelphia. I have a hard time buying that either one of them will go the right way for Washington. But there would be a glimmer of hope if they could get to that. And that's why that Carolina outcome is a huge, huge, huge deal. Had they lost that game yesterday, I think there'd be more of a possibility of it happening. But it feels like the division is lost. It's not. If they were to lose to Pittsburgh and Washington were to beat New Orleans, all of a sudden things could get real tight here in a couple of weeks. But in all likelihood, I kind of view the division as kind of off the table. Just because 3 or 4 at home, it's hard to figure Philadelphia to lose enough over the next few weeks to make it even a possibility. All right, other NFC South team. Tampa Bay. At this point, I think we want Tampa Bay to kind of get away and win their division. The problem with this is their schedule, at least on paper, reads harder than Atlanta's over the next 2 weeks. Atlanta has the Raiders on the road, Giants at home. Tampa Bay, who beat the Raiders yesterday, moved to 7-6. We lose head-to-head with them, which is why we want that. We don't want a 2-team race for the spot for the playoffs to be with us in Tampa. We lose that because of the opening game this year. That's why I think we want them just to win the division. Their next 2 games are both road games, at Chargers, at Dallas. Neither one of them are certainties at all. In fact, they're probably going to be underdogs against the Chargers this week, who had a near miss against Kansas City last night. At Dallas, Dallas is reawakened. It is a home game for them. It's not like Tampa's been blowing anybody out really over the last couple of months. They do end with 2 at home. They do end with both teams that are unlikely to be, in playoff contention at that point, Carolina and New Orleans. So if they were to just take care of business there, that's 9 for them. They win either one of the 2, Dallas or the Chargers. That's 10. Atlanta, in all likelihood, can't get to 10, especially if Washington beats them. But I think that's the scenario we want here in the end. We need Tampa Bay to win the division. We have a bad head-to-head situation with them. And if they win the division and Atlanta kind of falls off, what Atlanta team do we get in week 17 here? And it might become a game where the door is kind of shut on them. The problem is they play the Raiders this week and Tampa plays the Chargers, and suddenly that division could be tied. Then Tampa plays at Dallas and Atlanta gets the Giants at home. See what I'm saying? Like all of a sudden Atlanta, a team that seems to have fallen off, has an opportunity based on the schedule here to kind of climb back in, at least with their division on the line. And that could make this Washington game a really, really, really big deal. And we don't want Atlanta winning the division and Tampa being in the wild card. Of course, that said, under that scenario, Tampa Bay will have lost 1 or 2 games and could be a game or 2 behind us. So that could work out in our favor. But we don't want the Tampa scenario being what we're up against to get into the playoffs. We'll lose that due to head-to-head. NFC West is really the more troublesome spot because even with the NFC South thing, both those teams would have to get hot to make that a scenario. That's an unlikely scenario, but it's possible, right? It's possible. In all likelihood, one of them loses enough that Washington's ahead of them in the standings and you don't end up worrying about it. That's not the case in the NFC West now. The NFC West now is jumbled. I think we got a really good outcome with Seattle over Arizona. So they've now swept the Cardinals, played them a couple times over the last 3-4 weeks. They won 30-18. This is really good. Knocks essentially, I think, them out of the division. They're only 2 games up with 4 to go, but they lost the head-to-head with them by being swept. Therefore, Arizona would have to go at best. Boy, I mean, like if Seattle wins 1 game here, Arizona would have to run to get to 10-7. Arizona's schedule reads like they could do that. They do have a home game with New England. They do end with San Francisco, who's probably going to be out of the playoffs by the time that they play them. They do have to play at Carolina, who's been better, but listen, that's 3 non-playoff teams that they're playing. They will also have a game with the Rams. That'll probably be a big deal for them. If Arizona were to lose any one of them, that's 8 losses. We have a head-to-head with them because we beat them. We would love to be in a tie with them if we had to be in a tie with anybody. But I do think that this loss to Seattle yesterday all but eliminates them short of a run, but not unlike the thing with Atlanta that I told you about. They have New England, Carolina, and San Francisco on their schedule, 2 of them at home. They very easily could win those games. And if they do, they're suddenly sitting at 9 and potentially 10 with 1 upset over that. So we just need them to lose really once, and probably earlier, sooner rather than later. But if they were to win these next 2, New England and Carolina, all of the sudden, they're kind of back in play, not unlike the way Atlanta was. As for Seattle, I think we're rooting for them just to win the division. I guess it doesn't really matter if it's them or the Rams because we didn't play either one of them, but we kind of need them to beat each other up. They do play each other in week 18. That's the good news. Somebody has to lose. They're going to get Green Bay this week. I'm not sure where how I feel about this. Like if Arizona's going to fall off, if San Francisco just can't muster enough to get back into it, and we want this to be a 1-bid division, just not unlike the NFC South, to make the path easier for Washington to end up in the playoffs. So are we rooting for Green Bay here or are we rooting for Seattle? I'm not sure. I think I'm rooting for Seattle to run away with the division. The problem is, listen to their schedule. Green Bay home, Minnesota home, at Chicago, at Rams. Like, that's not easy. They could fall off. They could get into a jumbled situation. 2-2 is actually probably pretty good for us, right? But 2-2 then sticks them tied with us in the division and in the wild card. And then that's going to then come down to what is the tie break. And this is where things get really, really tricky. As for the Rams, worst result on the board, obviously, yesterday. Them beating Buffalo at home. It got them to 7-6. Massive difference between 7-6 and 6-7. They go to the Niners this week. It'll be the last gasp for them because they are 6-7. They beat Chicago yesterday. So their schedule's very hard, the Niners. Rams at home, at Miami. Detroit at home, at Arizona. As you know, we told you before, Arizona now has kind of fallen off in a place where one more loss probably eliminates them for our purposes. San Francisco beating the Rams, Dolphins, and Lions before they even get to that feels unlikely. One more loss to them gets them to 9 as a max. That probably knocks them off. I think we really want them to beat the Rams this weekend. The Rams have the Niners, then they go to the Jets, who clearly have quit. Then they finish at home, Arizona and Seattle. Them winning 3 of 4 or all 4 of them, and maybe that's better because that would get them to 11, would be a division winner. It's either going to be the Rams or Seattle. What we can't end up having happen is we end up in a tiebreak with either one of these teams, because then it is going to come down to those tiebreakers since we didn't play either one of them. So this is the nightmare scenarios that I keep feeling. I think we have to go 3-1 to get to the end of this whole thing. And the bottom line is this. Philadelphia wins the NFC East, or at least it appears that's what's going to happen. Detroit or Minnesota will win the NFC North, and the other one will be probably the highest wild card of everybody. So that's settled. 1, 2, 3 in the conference is settled. Green Bay is just 2 wins from 11. So that gets them to definitively one of the wild card spots, and that feels like in all likelihood, which means for us, is 10-10 enough? 10-7 enough. 2-2 finish, 10-7. It would likely eliminate Niners, Atlanta, Arizona, if Tampa Bay ends up winning their division, although their schedule is harder than Atlanta's coming down the stretch. And Atlanta did sweep them. So Atlanta's got that advantage if they can just hang in there to get there. 2-2 for Washington would likely eliminate at least Arizona and either probably Atlanta or Tampa, depending on results, but gets us to this spot. 11 all but eliminates the NFC West since they play each other. Seattle and the Rams have to play each other along the way here. Probably gets there. So to me, the magic number, I think, is 11. I think this team needs to go 3-1. I think 2-2 ends up playing with some serious fire in the end and comes down to tie breaks that you're not going to want anything to do with unless it's Atlanta, who you will have had a head-to-head and hopefully have beaten. It's why this weekend feels like, and I know they don't want to hear this because they only just talk about this is who we're playing, it's all we can control. This is a must-win. They can't lose. It would be a conference loss. It's a team they could eliminate, and they kind of can't afford to lose more than 2 definitively and potentially only 1. This has been an amazing season. I want to see them in the playoffs. I think they should be in the playoffs, but it's not going to be easy because the road got weird because of Philly and the NFC North. Be right back. Bram watch the show, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at aruba.com.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage, Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage, LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
Behind the delivery trucks that keep your life stocked, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People bringing a new offshore production platform online. People making our refineries capable of more, like making renewable diesel from agricultural waste. People trading and shipping fuels to our customers. And people helping truckers fill up and get maintenance at our convenient locations. They're part of the more than 300,000 jobs BP supports across the country. Learn more at bp.com/investing in America.
All right, welcome back. I think I do need to spend a few minutes here. I don't talk a lot about the Nationals baseball here too much, especially during football season. But considering what Juan Soto just signed for with the Mets, it's hard to ignore, isn't it? 15 years, 700 and whatever million dollars, biggest deal ever, surpasses Shohei Ohtani's. Ohtani's was strange in the way that it was structured, that Ohtani was willing to defer the vast majority of it to after essentially he retires, with what was pledged as a way of ensuring that he would have enough money and talent around him to win. That obviously paid off in year one as the Dodgers won a World Series. The Dodgers apparently were totally in play to get Juan Soto and were willing to pay another contract like that. My assumption is not with all the deferments. And the reporting from all the baseball reporters were essentially this is where in the lineup they were going to put him. They had sold him that way. I guess it was close. The Yankees did make apparently a very competitive offer to keep him, and that the amount of money apparently was marginal between the two. So maybe it was the structure by which the Mets were willing to do over the Yankees. I don't really know. We'll have to see some more of the details today as to why he chose the Mets over the Yankees. He's certainly made himself a villain in New York amongst the Yankees fans. That's a very interesting choice to make. And then there's just the Nationals in all of this, which is for the third time now. I don't blame the Scherzer thing. I think they traded him at the right time, and that was the right thing to do when they traded him. I never understood why they added Trey Turner to that deal, but they did, and whatever. This is now the third, prime, in two cases, Hall of Fame caliber players. I don't know about Trey Turner. We'll have to see, how everybody feels about that. But like primary MVP caliber type player, third player to do this, second in the prime of their career, Hall of Fame caliber talents that are now signing massive long-term deals in their division with their rivals. I'm sorry, but that's embarrassing. And if the Nationals ownership and organization doesn't feel embarrassed by that, the fact that they did both end up amongst their division rivals, the teams that they have to beat to ensure themselves to be in the playoffs, I don't know what will do it. And I like this family a lot. I like Mark a lot. I don't know the rest of the family well, but I know about them, and I do know that I like these people. The cost of doing business in this sport appears to be something that they're extraordinarily uncomfortable with. Obviously, when Juan Soto is on the Mets for what will end up being the vast majority of his career, and it's at a price that nobody's comfortable with. I mean, I don't want to write that check either. Obviously, he's validated in not accepting what the Lerners offered him a few years ago because it's double exponentially different than what it was when it was offered to stay preemptively. Still, I think they could have had the guy on the team for a couple of years. I think they could have gotten to this point, and maybe they just knew at the time, we're never going to pay whatever that going rate is. So if he's willing to take the money up front now, we'll take it, but we're not going to live through 2 years of him holding us up for whatever the number's going to be. And I guess I understand that on some level, except to say, you are outwardly and have been outwardly telling us for a long time that you're just not in this business to do things like this, to make deals like this. They did try to give Bryce Harper what appeared to be somewhat of a market deal with all the deferments. He turned it down for whatever, ultimately all the reasons he turned it down. But the reality is, their star players play for your division rivals. Your division rivals are willing to pay the price that it costs to do business in this sport with the high tier players, and this organization is not. And So they can paint the rebuilds to me all they want. They can paint, that they have a pathway and that their way works. And this is unfortunate for really everybody, not just the Nationals. If this is what it's going to be, then to win and win big consistently, there is a price to be paid. And I just don't believe that this ownership group wants to do that, that they don't want to engage in it. They'd rather take the tact of nobody's worth that kind of money, and we're going to get 8 players for that. And I often would believe that would be, you'd like to think that that's true, but if those 8 players end up playing positions and they're all mid-tier to average players at their positions, well, then is it really the money well spent? Because are you really competing? And so I think the learners just have to ask themselves, watching their homegrown star players they drafted or found in the primes of their careers, not playing for their team, and in all likelihood, and in most cases, because of the salary, I think they have to ask themselves, do we want to be part of this? Do we want to own a team that isn't ever really going to compete for the top tier talent? Because if you're not willing to go the extra distance for Bryce Harper and Juan Soto, generational players, who are you willing to do it for? All right, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bram watch the show, ESPN 630 Sports Capital.